I feel very lucky. Good evening. I'm with Domini Social Investments. We're a social investment fund. And for about the past 6 years or so, we've been working on this whole question of corporate political accountability and trying to bring greater transparency to corporate political work. And so I was very pleased to hear you raise that as a core issue. We often speak of this as a corporate governance issue, but I've long felt that it really is a human rights issue because it undermines the right to self-determination. And as you know, the ACLU takes a different view on this. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on how to take the issue of corporate political accountability, not just in this country, but globally, and present it as a core human rights concern, because I really think it's something that has been long ignored, and it's at the core of so many of these other issues that we're trying to address.
Well, first of all, I appreciate very much the work that is being done on by social investment funds, by those who are writing about social ethical investing. I think that this is sort of having its own impact on the corporate world, because it's realized investors are watching, are looking. And again, I come back to the importance of having now an agreed framework. It was wonderful that the Human Rights Council agreed this framework of protect, respect, and remedy, because within the respect, which is the corporate responsibility part of it, there will need to be not a do no harm thing, but a due diligence approach under the guidelines that John Ruggie is developing. And this will give, I think, social investors, the social investment funds, much more guidelines themselves of proper corporate responsibility, and it's framed in terms of human rights. So I think that gap is one that's beginning to be filled. And then the fact that there's a duty of states also to protect from violations by corporations. It's surprising how that got left out of thinking about the duty of states until it's now been clearly articulated and thankfully accepted by the Human Rights Council. And I think it will be a sort of a clearer world for future social investment and discussions of it when we're starting to see implementation of this framework following the presentation of the guidelines in June and the follow-up to that mandate. I certainly have been, as I've already mentioned, very aware that, and for obvious reasons, that it does have a big impact on corporations themselves. So it's kind of it's a way of ensuring that the guidelines will have good traction and that we will see more corporate responsibility. In fact, many of us would prefer if we leave out the word social now and corporate social responsibility and talk about corporate responsibility as part of corporate sustainability, which I know is also part of the thinking of the social investment community. So, great.
So, ma'am, if you had a guess, would you say that your question is a brief one, which will elicit a brief answer? Have at it. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Mary Robinson and Ray Suarez. This is extraordinary. I am thrilled that you're both focusing on the economic component of human rights, because that, it would seem, is the absolutely sine qua non of human rights. If you starve, you can't vote. Anyway, just don't mean to have a speech, but when we were...
Don't make me regret that I didn't make you the last...
During the Vietnam War, when there was an attempt to get people to oppose it, and a lot of people really didn't care, a number of the people involved said, we need to show them that this can affect them too, that their sons can get sent to Vietnam and come back without legs or dead. And you've got to reach people who don't see that it's in their interest, to show them that it is in their interest to do the right thing, to do the ethical thing. And what you're what you are struggling to bring about is a noble and tremendously ethical change. But I think if you have more teeth in the form of proof that this will benefit everybody, not just the destitute. And I know we're setting up a new organization called the Human Rights-Based Counterterrorism Initiative to show that if you give destitute children education, healthcare, job training, and hope, they will repudiate efforts at recruitment by terrorist organizations. Now, this is something that can make development attractive to people living in this country, because all you hear about is 9/11.
Stop right there and let me have her respond.
I think it is very important for us to get over what I think is an increasing fear of the other in the context of post 9/11, fear of Muslim countries, the Muslim world, stereotyping that women are not making progress in Muslim countries. There is a fundamentalist tendency in some of them, but there's a huge advance of women, and they want the world to recognize and support and help them. And I think, we're seeing in Europe now an anti-Islamic strong tendency out of fear, out of that, and I think we really, really need to address that very strongly. And obviously, the role of education is enormously important. If I could just end, because you triggered it, with a place that I was in recently where I saw starkly that we need to understand more and empathize more with the population. I was in Gaza very recently with the elders. I'd been there in early November 2008, before the complete closure and the bombing that occurred over the Christmas period. It's much worse now after that. And the worst thing of all is the way in which a population of about 1.5 million people, more than half of whom are children, because they're very large, young families, are trapped in a situation. The UN agency in charge of educating children does not have adequate resources to fulfill its clear responsibility to educate. So about 40,000 children in Gaza don't get to school at all, who should be going to the UNRWA school as refugee children. We went into one of the UNRWA schools that is a result of not being able to get any cement or materials in because of the blockade, because of the siege. And these the schools were destroyed during the bombing, and they haven't been able to rebuild. They need about 100 new schools in Gaza. We went into a classroom which was a ship's container, and there were 30 10-year-old boys there, and they were hot and sweating from the container in the heat of Gaza. And the teacher said it's very hard to teach them because they can't concentrate at that sort of level. And we talked to teenagers. One of them was a rapper, and just really likable youngsters, and a 21-year-old girl. And she said, you know, what really infuriates me, we can't have fun. And the reason I mention Gaza is the image created by a lot of the reporting of Gaza in this country is that Gaza consists of 1 million or so terrorists. Hamas terrorism, that's Gaza. When you go there and you meet ordinary people living in very difficult circumstances and people who desperately want to educate for the reasons that you were giving, the education that these youngsters would get if they could get it is a very good education about tolerance, about understanding the other, about not being part of this. That's the curriculum. I've seen it in the schools, and yet so many of the children can't even get that education. Because of the isolation of Gaza, Hamas is more and more powerful in controlling, and we tried to hold them to their responsibility as a government and pointed out that there's a feeling of, it's very subtly done. Hamas are not bringing in new laws that you could actually track. They're bringing about informal decrees One of them being about all girls in school now have to wear scarves, wear hijab, wear headgear. That's not the law, but it's a decree that's informally enforced, and therefore every girl is wearing a scarf. Young girls are not allowed to smoke in public. There's no law about it, but they know that there's an informal decree, and this is the sort of subtle way in which there's a whole influence. This 21-year-old who wrote a wonderful blog on the Elders website, which you can see at www.theelders.org. It's just beautifully written after she'd met with us. She said something that just broke my heart in a way. She said, the Israelis have put us into a cage, and Hamas is sucking out the air. And these are ordinary, likable people, more than half of them children. And it's all part of this stereotyping that we're creating and this fear that we're creating in our world. It's a different subject we could talk about at great length, but somehow we have to keep lines open all the time and see people as human beings and not to be stereotyped in some way as, because of where they are, as necessarily terrorists. We have to somehow break that. And I think obviously education is a huge part of it. But I must say, I believe that the issues in the Middle East are not getting better, they're getting more difficult, and we need to understand that we need the political solution, which we all know is the two-state solution with the 67 borders and Israel, Eastern Jerusalem as the capital of the Palestinian state, and Israel living in security and without threats to its right to coexist as a democratic state in that region. But from what we could see, things were not moving in that direction. I don't know why, just what you said about terrorism triggered that sense to me. I wish that all of you could have an opportunity to go to Gaza and meet the wonderful people that we met there, the wonderful children, the women who are desperate for an opportunity to work. The right to work has been totally abrogated in Gaza because business is impossible in Gaza. And it's humane in many ways, but that's a reality for some people. So I think it's important that you triggered at least that I would voice that here, because I live with that concern since I've been there recently. Okay.